Hi, I've left my box, and remember, I just left it for an hour or two, but if you leave it longer than that, make sure you take a needle tool and poke a hole in it first. And that way, as it shrinks, the air inside doesn't shrink, it won't crack because the air stays the same size, pot will shrink, and any weak areas, it could come apart. So poke a little hole, that releases the air as it shrinks. Okay, I've got the basic box here, and I have options. Let me show you a few of them. I'm going to start by cleaning it all up, but as far as the lids go, I have this for a possibility. Now, see, I've cleaned up all the edges on this one, and I cut in a regular shape. And it fits together that way. It only fits one way, but it locks in nicely. I left the top overhanging. It gives me a nice spot for some decoration. Cleaned up all the edges and beveled the bottom. Now here's another possibility. This one, I went a little further. This one, I put a texture on the slab before I started. And then, instead of having the edges butt edge like this one, I beveled the edges. That way, you could see the texture right to the very corners. Now, this one, I didn't attach the top. I made a flange. So I made this separately to fit into here and then attached it. This one also has feet, which brings it up, makes it a little more formal, finishes it off a little bit better. Now remember, you have to fire the lid with the piece so there'll be an area unglazed on it. So think about that as you're making it. And by keeping the lid on the piece as it's firing, it won't warp. Here's another possibility. I could cut a straight line all the way around. Problem with doing that is when I cut it, it'll just slide right off. So I need some way to keep it in place. So this one, I added little pieces on the outside. So when I put the lid back in place, it locks it. I did this the same way. And you know, I've got all those little extra slabs. I just make little geometric things and then see what happens with them. That's what this base is all about. And the lid, so it won't slide, I put little wads of clay in there. Just enough to lock it into place. And then finally, here's another possibility. This one, I cut out a square in the center, and I cut it out at an angle so it locks into place. Then I added another slab on top of it. So here's the original one from the jar, and then this is an additional slab, and then of course the handle. I'm going to turn it over, and you can shave it with a knife. Sometimes I'll even leave these pieces that stick out on the corners, but you don't have to. Then use the edge of the knife. Let me finish this one. And smooth, clean up that edge. Just making sure it's far enough out that the blade is touching the body. Just shaving it off. take a little bit at a time until you get it down to that corner, and then come back and burnish it down. You can also scrape it with ribs. If you have like a canvas texture on it, get rid of that. Clean up the bottom edge. Let's take this. And I'm going to rib it. Just like everything else, if you want it smooth and flat, go in opposite directions. When you first do this, it will be a little bit rough. Now, I've got a little hole there. I can fix that. Very, very simple. Very simple. All you need to do is get a little piece of plastic clay. Scratch it up a little bit there. A little water. And fill it in. Now, when you first put it on, plastic clay will be a little bit wet. Make it a little higher than you need it. But what happens is the slab will suck the water out of that clay and they'll equalize pretty quickly. So this will be the bottom, or it could be the top. And just kind of work those edges and you'll get a really nice, clean, precise edge. That's very, very bottom edge. I like to bevel a little bit. So I took my knife, put my hand against the pot, and that keeps it the same distance away. Just a little bevel. Now this is getting drier. I can work this a little bit more now. Now, use water very, very sparingly. Because if you wet this, particularly when it's drier, it could expand unequally and pull itself apart. So I'm just sponging it lightly. Then I'm going to come back with my credit card rib and really finish off that surface. So that's a wonderful place to be able to paint with your slips. It's a nice area to carve, or you could just leave it perfectly smooth and let the glaze do the talking. And when you do this, you get a little bit of that slip coming off on the edge of the card. And if you find a hole, you can fill it. Remember, opposite directions. At the bottom. And then finally, before I cut it, I'm going to round off those corners. Just hit it with a sponge. Hit it with your finger. Now, they don't have to be round. They can be just rounded. You don't want them sharp, because that will encourage chipping later. Okay. So I've got the basic box built. So I could cut it here. I could cut a random cut. I can make this any size. I kind of like the overhang. Looks a little like a roof. In fact, look what happens. I can turn that down just a little bit on the corners. There. Okay. So what I think I'll do is do the opening in the center. Okay, so now I'm going to measure out where I want to cut the opening. Just want to make sure it's within the wall. I think this is about right. make that just a little bit bigger. I think I'll just go out this much further. Okay, so now it's just a matter of going in and cutting it. Now it's a good idea, if you're going to do this, to make a good strong line as a guide for your knife. Because if you make that too thin or try to just cut directly, sometimes that knife can wander. So I'm using a metal straight edge. You could use a ruler. And I'm going to take the X-Acto knife, a very sharp knife, and dig in and cut it at an angle. Doing like that 45-degree angle. That way it won't fall in and will act nicely for the lid. Make sure you can get it out. There. Okay. So there's the lid. I'm going to have to add something to this so I can take it off. It could be as simple as a knob. Then you see the seam line. So what I think I'll do is add another piece of clay. Before I do that, I'm going to clean up these edges, just kind of get that sharpness off. Just beveling it a little bit. I can do this many different ways. I just happen to have this knife in my hand, so I'm using it. I'm going to bevel this top edge all the way around. Those pencil marks will not show later, they just burn away. And just going to round off the edges on this. Don't want to mess with it too much because you want that to fit nicely. These corners, make sure you come back and pack them in a little bit. Just press them in there. And that way, if you created a cut when you cut it, it won't continue. Possibilities. I could put coil slabs over the edge, kind of overlapping it a little bit. I could put another slab on top, like I did with this one. I'll do that. And that doesn't have to be square. It could be round. It could be all kinds of shapes. Just taking 1/4 of an inch off of each side. There. Clean up the edges. Good tool to do that with is just your wooden knife. Round them off. So now I just have to stick that on there like that. Now, if you do this, make sure you really score and slip it and don't trap any air in between the two pieces. Cross hatch it, both directions. Remember, these are leather hard, so they really need that deep scoring and some slip. And then on with you. Really squish it around, move it around, get it so that slip oozes out the seams. Clean that extra slip off. I'm going to draw around the seam and really compress it there. Last thing I need to do is decide on on a top, on a handle. So I'm going to start with a coil. Roll the edge of my stick into the coil. Soften it just a little bit. Decide where I want the handle to be. Mark it. And I'm going to add an additional piece here as a transitional element. Maybe not this big, about there. Scratch, a little bit slip, scratch, squish. Scratch, a little bit of slip, and squish it on. Okay, so there's some additional cleanup, and remember, you've got to sign it. I may put it up on feet. Again, I want you to be creative. Go with many possibilities that are available to you, and make a nice box. Thank you.